state. So we're delighted to have you here today to discuss your unique journey as an artist and to talk about your music, which has inspired so many. We're delighted that you can join us today, and I look forward to hearing your story.
Thank you, Jason.
So let's
Absolutely.
start with your journey as an artist. Tell us how you came to find composition, and tell us what makes you unique and how you've come to your path.
Well, boy, that's a long story for me, and I'll try to be brief, but it's been a lot of twists and turns along the way. I knew from an early age that I wanted to be involved in music. I think a lot of musicians probably are that way. We sense our calling and know that we're going to be in the world of art, whatever form that might take. In my case, music. And I think we know that early on. We might not always know exactly how that's going to play out as our careers develop and as our lives and take place. I started out really wanting to be a jazz pianist. To be honest, I have quite a jazz, well, not quite, but a bit of a jazz piano background. When I was in high school, I thought, okay, what I'm going to do is, graduate from high school, go to college, get a jazz performance degree, going to move to the Village there in New York, and that's going to be what I do. And so I always had this creative aspect to my life. I was a good improviser at the piano. As I said, I enjoyed playing jazz in high school. I went to college and started as a jazz major, and I had some wonderful teachers. And one of my teachers, a guy named Dr. Jeff Hayden, who's still teaching at Georgia State University, where I did my undergrad, he said, you can learn all you need to know about jazz by getting out there with the guys and playing it, but this really is the time in your life that you develop a classical technique. You're here with good teachers. You're here in a good school. Let's see how far you can go. And he kind of convinced me, and I switched over from jazz performance to piano performance. And it didn't take long before I thought, yes, this is what I want to do. I want to develop my classical chops. I want to maybe find a university to teach, perform concerts as much as I'm able to, go and finish up my master's and my DMA in piano performance, because with piano performance, you've got nothing else to do but go ahead and finish the thing. Just one degree usually isn't enough to get the job done. And so that was the plan, and I jumped into it and loved it. And it wasn't too far into that plan when I kind of hit a bump in the road. I was starting my master's degree and doing piano contests and practicing the obligatory 6 hours a day that pianists practice. And I started coming down with a very severe right hand issue right in the center of my wrist. And it wasn't carpal tunnel. I was tested and x-rayed and nothing like that, but it was a strain. It was some kind of muscle pull that no one could quite identify. And the truth of the matter is, it made my 20s absolutely miserable, to be honest. I suffered through my master's degree. Dr. Hayden was a wonderful teacher and coach and helped me to get through it. I flew out to the University of Colorado at Boulder, where I did my doctorate degree and auditioned there and got through the audition. And I didn't tell anyone there that I was injured. I was afraid that if I told my teachers there that, hey, you're bringing in someone that is injured, they might have thought twice about giving me an assistantship or accepting me at all into the program. And so I was a little bit devious there, unfortunately, in keeping my injury from them until I moved to Boulder and I knew that, okay, they can't throw me out now, I'm here. And I suspect that probably a lot of musicians, maybe not so much now as in years past, because performing disorders are becoming more and more talked about and prominent, but I've heard stories about how symphony players and others have often kept their maladies hidden.
They still do. I mean, I've heard a lot of rumors of Metropolitan Opera string players who have tendinitis issues.
Right.
They just mask it and hide it because of their in-career. Yeah, no, so it's very important.
That's right. That's exactly right. And so I was kind of under that umbrella. And when I came to Colorado, I had some wonderful teachers there as well, and And I am definitely a man of faith, and I spent much time praying to the Lord, asking, what is this? What do I do with this? Are you trying to tell me something? Am I going to, when you love something as much as we performing artists love what we do, whether we're singers or whether we're pianists or violinists or whatever, when you love something that passionately, and then all of a sudden you're faced with the prospect of a life without it. It really is devastating. And nowadays there are doctors that I think, as I mentioned earlier, that are a little bit more open to dealing with this. But I remember going to several hand doctors and just hoping against hope that they could give me some kind of good news and relief, and they would say, "Hey, it's just your wrist. Take an Advil. You're going to be fine." And, to someone that has spent hours playing the piano all day, and now you're reduced to 5 minutes at the piano a day, it can be devastating. But I had wonderful teachers, and when at Colorado, and when I told them of my issue, they helped me, and the Lord really kind of used some great teachers to kind of help diagnose and back me out of that hand injury. Now, I say all that to say this, that when I moved to Colorado and I was really in the thick of dealing with this hand injury and trying to figure out a way that I could play again, I was directing a church choir there at East Boulder Baptist Church in Boulder, Colorado. And I was directing the choir, and I started writing a few things for them. And I don't know at that point if I really thought writing could be an alternative career if this piano thing doesn't work out. I don't think that was quite it. But it was just a way for me to stay involved in music. And I'd always, although I'd never thought of myself as a composer at all, I had often, I was creative in music. And it was a way that my creativity could come out. And I discovered that I really liked it. And so, as it turns out, I was helped out of my injury, and I no longer hurt today, thank the Lord. I play as much as I want, and I'm just fine. But when I did get out of the injury, I had kind of been bitten by the writing bug, and it had become my focus, and that's where it all started. And I said earlier that I'm a man of faith, and I am, and I tend to look for spiritual reasons behind things that happen to me, and I think part of the issue of the piano playing kind of being thwarted by my hand issue was that it was the Lord's way of probably taking me off a path I was on that maybe I wanted, but I wasn't maybe cut out for, and directing me to something that I was cut out for. I was a good pianist, and practiced hard, but to really make it in a performing arts world as well, you come into contact with these folks all the time. That's a level of talent and a level of commitment that I'm not sure I possessed. It's pretty rare air that these folks breathe, and I'm afraid had I continued on that path, it might have led to more disappointments than failures. And then the other thing that I think probably happened is I had, and this is a lesson that I learn every day as a believer, as a Christian, as a composer. I am when I jump into something, Jason, I'm there all the way, body, mind, heart, spirit, soul. And it's very easy for me to let whatever my passion is become the thing that I build my entire life around. And I had decided that I'm going to be a pianist, and that's my goal. That's my God with a little g, if I can kind of describe it that way. And as believers, I think that when we get our priorities out of whack, God has a way of kind of straightening them back out.
We've all felt that as artists. I know for me, it was I wanted to be an opera singer in college, and going into grad school, and conducting I never really considered it until I was in my master's degree, and a conductor mentor said to me, "You're not going to be an opera singer. You don't have voice isn't big enough, but you'd be a really great conductor." And once I processed the shock and I went a different direction, the Lord opened up doors I never thought were imaginably. So hearing your story is quite warming, and it reminds me so much of I think what a lot of us go through in the professional field.
I think that's absolutely not an unusual story. So I think he was kind of teaching me that whatever you do, you have to keep me first and get your priorities right. I did go on and teach collegiately. I taught at Sterling College, which is a wonderful college in Kansas. I don't know if you've heard of Sterling. The people there, it's in the town of Sterling. And the joke when I came, we would travel around the country, and people would always ask, "Where's Sterling College?" And the joke would always be, "Well, it's on the Staple." And what they meant by that is you open up the U.S. Atlas, and right there in the center of the Atlas is the Staple, put it all together, and that's about where Sterling is. And I taught piano. You know how it is at a small college. You wear a lot of different hats. So I did teach piano, but I also taught theory and orchestration and composition and whatever else was needed. And I was there for 8 years. And from that point, I was publishing more and more. I was writing more and more. I was kind of having my heart turned toward the industry, maybe a little bit more, and the publishing industry, that is. And I finally, an opportunity came open with Hal Leonard, and I just felt, gosh, this is it. Let's take it. And I did.
How exciting! How God rewards those journeys, those leaps of faith, and you step on that water, and you never know where your path's going to lead you. And here we are today.
Well, that's right. Of course, I have to admit that in the time of COVID-19, when choirs aren't singing anymore, that I have looked back and thought, boy, that really was a leap of faith, because we're kind of in a mess right now. But I have no doubt that we're going to get through it, and that things are going to work out. So that's a long answer to a very short question, but that's how I kind of came to the point where I am today. So tell
me how many pieces are in your catalog. Do you write for piano? What do you write for? Tell us about your depth. I know you do lots of choir arrangements, mostly sacred, but tell me about your oeuvre.
Sure. Yes, my writing is primarily in the sacred choral market. I really write for a lot of different levels. Probably the majority of the music that I've written for have been to satisfy the needs and the demands of small to mid-sized choirs. I really also have a great interest in writing and stretching out a little bit artistically and providing material for more collegiate, or certainly at the very advanced high school choirs. I think that you started off this podcast with Talia Miracula, which is one of the new pieces that I have out. And that's certainly for choirs that are a little bit more advanced.
Stunning music. I hope everyone takes a look at that piece. That should be on everyone's program next year.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that, Jason. It was a pleasure to write it. I had a wonderful lyricist with that, Pamela Stewart, wrote the lyrics and the translation into Latin, and did a wonderful job. But it's primarily choral sacred music. I have some secular pieces as well, and I'm interested in expanding that part of my oeuvre. I do have several piano books that are in print. Although I'm a pianist, I have not been able to write as much piano music maybe as you might think, because I've been so involved in choral. The other part of me that I absolutely love is orchestration. It's odd. I spend most of my time writing choral music, but if you were to turn on my iPhone and check out what I'm listening to, it's primarily orchestral. And I am a huge Mahler fanatic.
Oh, me too.
Huge
Wonderful.
Really. I remember when I was in college, I didn't know Mahler from a hole in the ground. And in a music history class, someone played Mahler, and it was the very first movement of Mahler 4, right when those sleigh bells come in. Dooey dooey dup dup, dooey dooey dup dup. And it just captivated me. And then when I moved to Boulder, Colorado, the University of Colorado in the city of Boulder, they have an event every summer. It's probably been canceled this summer, but they usually have an event called Colorado Mahler Fest. And so every summer they bring in Mahler scholars. Oh, it's just wonderful. You just immerse yourself in it. So I chased a bunny trail there, but I'm very interested in orchestral music and in orchestration. And I've not written anything at all which stands alone as an orchestration in and of itself, a symphonic piece. But I've been very involved in orchestrating anthems for larger church choirs that might have an orchestra at their disposal.
We have a question from New York City, from Eve from New York City, asks, how do you find inspiration to write new pieces?
Well, Eve, a lot of that. It's funny. I was teaching a seminar, which Jason, we can talk about a little bit later. It's called the Composer Symposium, which is sponsored by a very good friend of mine. In fact, my best friend, Joseph Martin, and we can talk about that in a bit. But one of the topics that I just finished lecturing about 2 days ago was creativity. And I think that the old adage that we're always taught, garbage in, garbage out, or maybe your mother told you you are what you eat. I think a lot of that has to do, or a lot of it is true, rather, in our creative process. And as much time taking in what at least I consider to be good art, what nourishes me, what inspires me. I take in as much of that as possible, and I love poetry. I get a lot of inspiration from poetry. I'm in my little writing studio right now, but right in front of me is a whole book are full of nothing but poetry books. So I read poetry a little bit every day. I love good films. I love cinema. I love architecture. I love art. I love drawing. I love photography. I love all sorts of types of music. I live in Texas, and I guarantee that you wouldn't believe this. I'm probably the only sacred choral music composer in the world that, at least when we're not under quarantine from a pandemic, I put on a cowboy hat and go two-stepping in Texas dance halls to Western swing. I love it all. And I think that being exposed to as much good art, and of course that's a subjective term because what you consider good might not, be what I like, but maybe I should rephrase it and say art that feeds your soul, even if it's not necessarily the kind of art that you make. I'm not a filmmaker, but I love films. And I think that the more we surround ourselves with that, the better off and the more inspired we're going to be. So I hopefully
I'm with you
that
there.
answers a little bit of the question.
When I lecture my students at Seton Hall University, I always talk about the cross-pollination of the arts and how visual art has always affected musical art from the Impressionistic period to all of the great composers were surrounded by an artistic community, music being like an amber that traps and everything around it. So you have to be experiencing art while you're at that. It's a wonderful answer, and we appreciate that insight.
Well, and before you move on, I'll tag on something a little more specific and practical to that, and that is that I really am a choral composer. Books, they're arrangements of songs that are already pre-existent, and I know the words to the songs if it's a book of Christmas carols or something like that. I am so because of that. I have to say that I'm probably, if Eve asked me to say what are you most inspired by, it's words, it's texts, and every one of my pieces, obviously, in choral music, have had their genesis in someone sending me a text that I really resonate with, that really, hate to sound cheesy, but a text that sings to me, and I spend a lot of time going through those poetry books above there, copious, really, amounts of hours. Hear music, Brad Nick sponsored by Velveeta, but it really is true. I'm not a lyricist myself, but I love lyrics and I love text, and when I find that, it just kind of almost brings forth the music.
We have a question from Daniel from Delaware. How did the piece that was played in the opening, how did that come about? Tell us about your creation of that work, and were the words submitted to you? Tell us the genesis of that work.
Well, and this is Daniel?
Daniel from
Jason?
Delaware.
Okay, Daniel, with that particular piece, I really love that style of writing. I love Eric Whitacre. Obviously you can hear Eric in that piece. And
diatonic chordal clusters.
Absolutely. Eric came out. Oh, he's had Water Night and Luke Sarumque and so many wonderful pieces that people know that are really now iconic. And you love it. I absolutely love that kind of writing. And so the lyricist for that piece is a lady that lives here in Texas. Her name is Pamela Stewart. And I had expressed to her, gosh, Pam, do you have any text? I co-write with her often. And it was really me coming to her and saying, this is kind of the piece that I would like to write. I'd love to branch out and and experiment a little bit and just see what I can come up with here. Do you have anything that might lend itself well to that? And if I remember our conversation correctly, she said, well, no, I don't, but I'll start to work on something. And so she did. She came up with painstakingly crafted these wonderful lyrics, which she translated, into Latin and then sent the text to me. And you can find that link to that piece on YouTube, and you can go and kind of pause on the score play there, where you can see the text that's there. I don't have it all in front of me, and I'd make an idiot of myself if I tried to remember it. But Pam wrote it in such a way that the text is cylindrical, I guess, or cyclical. That's the word I'm looking for, not cylinder, but cyclical. It moves in a cycle. And the translation of the text, it starts with, darkness, stillness, and then it moves through a few phrases which describe what's happening here on this. There's the light, the Luke's section, and then what happens in the last stanza of the music is that it happens, the words come back again that opened it, but they come back oppositely, right? It's cyclical. And so the challenge there was to create music that almost like box crab cannons, remember those kind of things, that work moving forward to the middle section, and then the middle section happens, but then it kind of works moving itself backwards out of it. And so the piece ends, and finally ends, coming back to that C sharp, which opens the piece. I'm probably making a mess trying to explain that, but that was the deal. We decided we might try to create something like this, and then my music had to follow the structure that Pam had set forth in her
So
lyric.
who are some of your inspirations for some choral inspirations? You mentioned text painting from the Renaissance. So give us some of your musical inspirations that mix together and make that are in the back of your mind.
Well, again, so much of what I listen to is orchestral. Brahms and Mahler and Brahms are kind of my guys. But in the choral world, of course I have folks that I look up to. I love. I'll talk about more classical choral composers first, and then I'd like to maybe mention a few names just in our world of church sacred music. I certainly love Morton Lauridsen. I love Eric Whitacre. A relatively new guy on the scene now, but he's not really that new. He's been around for a while, but his name is Paul Meeler. And I don't know if I know of any composer that just kind of takes me to the sublime, like the music of Paul Meeler does. I really don't know how to describe it more than that. John Rutter, of course, is a favorite. I mean, what composer wouldn't love to be able to write a melody like John Rutter writes? And I'm fortunate in the little subculture of the musical world that we live in to be inspired by a lot of composers whom I know and work with, folks like Joseph Martin, folks like Craig Courtney. I'm a huge fan of Craig Courtney, Dan Forrest, Elaine Hagenberg, Lloyd Larson. I mean, there are just so many names out there. I hate to even start naming names.
Them come alive this summer in one way or another. It's going to come alive, and
absolutely.
I look forward to be in touch with you. And once you're on the show, you're a friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you for having me. This has been a blast.
Thank you for watching Music Matters 2020 with me, your host, Jason Tramm. We want to say be sure that you subscribe to us right on the YouTube channel, and hit that bell to get the most current information on upcoming guests and topics. Like us on Facebook, and consider becoming a Patreon member. Patreon members are a way to support artists and communities that you like, even in these difficult times. With all artists having such catastrophic losses in career and scale, think about this as a way to support the artists in this show in particular. Anyone who decides to do that will get a t-shirt, Music Matters. So thank you so much. And remember, everyone, keep music alive. Thank you.